Michael Crowley, to you first. It feels like that phase of this effort that Courtney's talking about, the accurate dissemination of the intelligence about the amassing of troops on Ukraine's border, about ramping up the numbers, even as Putin was saying he was de-escalating. That phase may have ended, and now it's a matter of either helping to arm and prepare the Ukrainians from whatever heinous act comes next from Putin, and it's unclear if that's the bucket we should put the chemical weapons reporting into, or simply trying to understand whether there's any, I don't know what the right frame is, prospect for a ceasefire or prospect for peace. And I wonder what you're hearing from the State Department about their morale in terms of being able to bring this to any sort of closure or resolution in the near term.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. You know, I wish I could say that morale was high in the sense that there was optimism about diplomacy or a short-term conclusion for this. You know, I think that, you know, everyone is asking how and when does this end? You know, is there some scenario that brings this to a halt in the foreseeable future? And it's really hard to find a credible one. You know, the West is doing a lot to bolster Ukraine, to help it put up a strong fight against the Russians. But, you know, there are very few people, although there are some that I have heard, who think that Ukraine can outright win militarily. Could they force Putin to essentially sue for peace if the battlefield conditions turn badly enough? Potentially, but, you know, what you hear from a lot of analysts is that Putin essentially can't afford to climb down or to lose in this conflict. So it's pretty bleak on that front. I would say the one other thing I'll say is the one place where you might see some kind of morale, if we're going to use that word, in the U.S. government, in the State Department, is I think that there's a sense that the coalition against Russia and Vladimir Putin has come together, you know, very effectively. And you see a sense in Washington and European capitals, a kind of sense of mission, a unity of purpose. And as somebody put it to me, you know, a moral high ground that the U.S. in particular really hasn't had for the last many years. I mean, just think, Nicole, as a closing thought here, a few months ago, we pulled out of Afghanistan, you know, concluding this 20-year post-9/11 war on terror on a note that many people saw as sort of dismal and a failure. And so I'm not saying that this is a positive situation overall, but an interesting dynamic here is that it has in some ways reset American foreign policy in a potentially nobler way with a clearer sense of purpose. But that is, of course, is very secondary to this tragedy that's unfolding that, again, I see no near-term conclusion for in sight.
You know, Claire, I'm happy that we get to talk to you today. I mean, I think something that American viewers wrestle with is the human tragedy, the indiscriminate bombing of civilians, which Michael Crowley's colleague, Lindsay Addario, brought home in an image that she shot of civilians. We learned more about them today, a family, a mom and her 9-year-old and her teenage son, killed in what was supposed to be a humanitarian corridor. And President Zelensky's courage and steeliness and pleas for help living alongside this universal desire to avoid World War III. How do you square those two things, Claire?
Well, I think all we have to realize is after these supposed talks today, the foreign minister from Russia actually, with a straight face, lied about bombing a maternity hospital. I mean, this is not a country that's serious at this point about a way out. This is a country that is willing to lie to its own people, to arrest thousands and thousands of its own people, chase its own people out of its own country, and bomb many of their own relatives in a neighboring country, civilians, targeting civilians. So I really do think that they are not serious at this point. Now, I think, Nicole, let me give you a second and give perspective on what Congress did last night and what the Senate is probably going to do tonight before they head home for the weekend. They're going to pass an aid package of almost $14 billion. Now, let's put that in perspective. Half of that is humanitarian aid. And they got to get this passed tonight because we got to get those resources over there as quickly as we possibly can to help those mothers and those children. But half of it is military assistance. Now, let's put that in perspective. That is more than the entire annual budget for defense in Ukraine. So last night, we passed almost $7 billion in military assistance for the Ukrainian objectives, and their annual budget for their defense, for their whole country, is only a little over $6 billion. So we are going to be providing a lot of resources. And don't think Moscow's not noticing that. Don't think that Putin is not noticing that. We are really in a position to help them with ground munitions, and this is largely being fought on the ground. It could make a big difference if we get that aid over there really quickly.
I mean, to Claire's point, Michael Crowley, this is the latest estimate of how it's going. And I think it's fair to say that Ukraine continues to exceed the expectations that were held by the West 15 days ago. Russia has lost hundreds of vehicles, an estimated 15 to 20 fixed-wing aircraft, an estimated 20 to 25 helicopters. A current U.S. assessment has, as we reported at the top, that it will take Russia about 1 to 2 weeks to encircle Kyiv. They've been in that convoy that, if it wasn't so sinister, has almost become comedic, with no cars moving, cars being abandoned, people leaving them there on the road as they don't appear to move. But then it would take them another couple of weeks to take the city. I wonder what you make of how lawmakers are assessing the Ukrainians as a better than expected match for the Russian military.
Oh, I think, the performance of the Ukrainians is fundamental to the dynamic here. Not only, Nicole, militarily and related to that, this sort of bewildering and as you say, almost darkly satirical incompetence of the Russian military. But not only the military performance of the Ukrainians, but the kind of, public relations component, if that's the phrase, the valor of President Zelensky and bravery that he's shown, that we've talked so much about, the skill in disseminating images and messages through social media, all kinds of channels, including TikTok, has clearly galvanized American public opinion. I think riveted ordinary Americans who may not have paid much attention to foreign policy, may not have had a very clear sense of where Ukraine was and what it was about. And that's channeling through, ordinary Americans into their representatives in Congress, who are really mobilizing for more action to a point, honestly, Nicole, that I think, might be making the Biden administration a little uncomfortable. There's a lot of pressure on President Biden to be doing things. But this administration has now, kind of maxed out on sanctions, at least in the plausible realm for the foreseeable future. And there's still pressure to do more, to escalate. And President Biden does not want to. It's very clear that he's extremely wary of the potential stumbling into a direct conflict with Russia. So it creates a very difficult political dynamic. But to your original question, the performance of the Ukrainians, yes, has been amazing and is central to this entire political and military situation right now.